Okay, so welcome to Wild Story Conversations, and today we are delighted to welcome Dr. Tamara Pizzoli. Dr. Pizzoli, Tamara is a writer, curator and founder of the English Schoolhouse, which is an award-winning boutique publishing house based in Texas and run in Rome. I hope I got that right. And she's written a number of award-winning children's books, including The Ghanaian Goldilocks, Tallulah the Tooth Fairy CEO, which I haven't read, but it sounds amazing, Lotus and the Baby Bird that I think she's going to share with us today, and a number of alphabet books, including F is for Fufu, M is for Mohawk, an alphabet book of fresh hairstyles, and M is for Marrakesh, which is a book of a celebration of cities from around the world. And she's also the curator of In Nero, Black Girls in Rome. So thank you so much for being with us, Tamara.
Thank you for having me.
So my first question is, when I come across your books, I'm really struck by the beauty and complexity of the illustrations as they're paired with the wonderful text. And, you know, as books for children can often be patronizing, and you're really not giving them the complexity or the beauty of art. And I love a quote I found by you that says, "Children deserve the best art because they understand and appreciate it the most." And I just wondered if you could tell us a bit more about your thoughts around this.
Yes, I really believe that nothing falls flat on children. They appreciate everything and they have such wondrous intuition, but also engagement with the world and with everything that's presented to them. And so they haven't learned to be snarky or critical or I just find, especially as a former kindergarten teacher and a mom now of 4, they just know what to do with it. They know to take it for what it is, which is a visual gift, and to learn from it and engage and then, you know, expand upon. A lot of times they'll naturally, once presented with interesting art or a new concept, then they'll naturally go off and like draw something similar or expand upon it. So they really understand the learning opportunities and the joy that lies within all that's visually stimulating.
That's really interesting, and I love what you say about the, you know, the intuition and also the appreciation of the real world. And I think, you know, for me, because I work with fairy tales, and there's that sense in a fairy tale that the real world isn't separate from the wonder world. You know, they're the same place.
Right.
And I love the way children know that instinctively. Like they know that the world is wonderful. It's just
Yes, and so for me, having the fortune of being connected with so many different artists that are of such an incredible high caliber, and it's like, for me, the child within me and the adult within me that I show up to in life as every day now, both really delight in beauty and art. And so it's really fulfilling to be able to share what I get to see regularly. For example, the book I'm going to share today, Lotus and the Baby Bird, this is it. And the art within it is by a master Italian painter named Elena Tomasi Ferroni. She's the one that's done, this is a reimagination of Paolina Bonaparte in the background. Mm-hmm. And I happened upon her studio here years ago in Rome, and I had never seen anything like it outside of a museum. I mean, she just sits in the window there and paints these gorgeous masterpieces with such ease. And she just sits there from like 12 p.m. to 8 p.m., no break really. And what's also interesting is that people within the piazza, within the square, just kind of rotate in, or like their tourists will just stop. And anyway, so I went in there to take art lessons actually, because it's something I'd always wanted to do. And then after about, I'd say 8 months of hacking away, I'm not a painter at all, at this one piece, I turned and looked at her. I was like, "Hey, would you be interested in illustrating one of my stories?" And she goes, "I was waiting for you to ask." So, I mean, I've sold, that's another thing, I just fell into selling her art as well, because I would post her art on Facebook, and like me, people would just fall in love with it, and it's high end, so it's costly. So I said all that to say, to be able to have a whole, this level of art in a book to share with children is a real gift, and to, not have had to wager one of my own children to pay for it, because the relationship is there. Now she's Lotus's godmother.
Wow.
So I chose this story also because of the stories behind the story. I have a good friend who's an astronaut, who told me that, that the stories behind my stories are just as interesting, that I should write a book about that.
Wonderful, thank you. I saw on your website, I saw that Elena Tomasi Ferroni has illustrated many of your works, and just as you say, just the incredible beauty of her paintings. And I also saw that you display some of her paintings, and I was looking through them, and I was really struck by particularly her paintings of gods and goddesses of Rome, and really interested by the way she portrays them as a people of color. And I wanted to ask you about that, and also about your exploration of the diversity in fairy tales, because, for me, I work with fairy tales, and I'm really struck by the way fairy tales should be like a really diverse aspect of our culture. That they appear around the world, and things like Cinderella appears in every country across the world, and yet, in white Western culture, we're really stuck with this image of Cinderella as blonde and white and blue-eyed, and it seems to me so kind of problematic for our children as well, because then we give them this one frozen image of something which is so complex. So yes, I wondered if you could tell us more about your exploration of diversity in fairy tale and myth as well, working with Elena Tomasi Ferroni.
Yes, well, my very first book, The Ghanaian Goldilocks, which you mentioned in your introduction, was the first kind of attempt that I had at flipping a fairy tale as we usually have it portrayed to us on its head. And so in my version, Goldilocks is a little boy named Kofi. He lives in Accra, Ghana. He's called Goldilocks as a nickname because of his sun-lightened hair. And I just had so much fun with that one that I've been doing all of them. And I find it wonderfully entertaining with the racists, because, they really get upset. They're like, oh my God, what? No, Tallulah, the Tooth Fairy CEO, this book, because I portrayed Tallulah as the Tooth Fairy, the boss of all Tooth Fairies, and she's a Black woman. It's unfortunate. If I had known that you haven't read Tallulah yet, I would have chosen that book, because it's really timely right now. And I don't think I have a copy laying around, maybe in my children's room, but then I don't want to brave that, the children right now. So later, maybe I'll do, well, the audiobook is on YouTube, actually, so you can hear that.
I'll put a link in.
So with Elena, when I started, because I curate the art for my stories as well. So if you think about it, I just started self-publishing in 2014, and then The Ghanaian Goldilocks won the ELIT book award for like excellence or something, and a silver award. And so I thought, there's probably something to this, which I knew anyway, but I just then really got addicted to it. And I believe that a lot of times writers just write what they know. So because I'm a Black woman from Texas, it's natural for me to write stories where the characters, it would make no sense for me to do a retelling of Cinderella and she's blonde. I have no knowledge of that, right? And so we're kind of seeing a push for that right now in the literary world with this, the hashtag own voices, and the for storytellers to really have the space and the support, especially from the major publishing houses, to publish our own stories or retellings in our own way. That said, with Elena, when she probably wasn't even, planning on depicting all of these people of color, but for me, it's what needs to be happening, and it's just the right natural thing to do. So with Of Gods and Goddesses, with that book, when I was smaller, I really loved everything mythological. I loved Roman mythology. I loved Greek mythology. I loved all of those stories very deeply, and I saw myself within the stories and the lessons that were to be gleaned from them. And so when I got the chance to curate Of Gods and Goddesses with Elena, it's like, no, Mars is a Black man. And, all the other Venus is going to be a Black woman. And so she's a very dear friend of mine now. So, I mean, sometimes she's like, but we have to put somebody white is going to go here. But she understands the importance of it, because for a child to open that book and see themselves depicted in that way is powerful beyond any words that you or I have. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just deep truth. I know that. So yeah, because I'm a Black woman who's writing, who's also art directing, and who's also publishing, the books are Black books, but they're not Black books, so to speak, as far as just who they're intended for. It just so happens that the Tooth Fairy is a Black woman.
Totally.
Yeah, it just
that's the way it is. Yeah.
So
and the boss. I love the way she's the CEO, the boss of all the Tooth Fairies.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm working today. The illustration for the sequel will be finished for Tallulah, and that'll be published next week. So that one is Tallulah, the Tooth Fairy CEO, and the Corona Challenge, and it explores how she deals with collecting teeth when you're supposed to be socially distancing.
That sounds amazing. Yeah, I really look forward to reading that.
Thank you.
So I got one more question actually before we read the story. If we could come back to the Ghanaian Goldilocks, because one of the things that really struck me about it is the role of community in the story. The Goldilocks that so one of the flips you make is that the boy Kofi, obviously he's a boy, not a girl, but I'm really interested by the kind of the flip, because in our story we don't really know where this girl comes from. She kind of wanders out of the woods and finds the bear's house, and then she's done this terrible thing and she flees. That's it. That's the end of the story. And it's so kind of uncentered from her community. And in your story, not to give any spoilers, but it seems as if the boy's adventure, Kofi's adventure, is really embedded in community, and it's for him, it's a way of exploring, like I love the way his mischievousness is both kind of checked and also celebrated by his community, and also the fact that he's so naughty actually brings all the community together at the end. And so it just made me think of a conversation, I don't know if you know, a conversation between the speculative fiction author Kay Tempest Bradford and Shweta Thakral, who's a YA author. And they're talking about a home, and they're talking about the way that often in Western fiction, we have this trope that for anybody to have for children to have a good adventure, they have to kind of tear themselves away from their home and get rid of their community and go it alone. And they're like, well, why should that happen? It doesn't make any sense. And they talk about it in the context of, for children of color who might have kind of different familial structures and who might have been brought up to see community with a kind of different significance and different respect, how that trope just doesn't always work. So I just wondered if you could tell me a bit about, how you wrote community into the Ghanaian Goldilocks.
That's interesting, because I think it's the first time I've ever been asked about that. My best friend, who's also an illustrator for one of my books that's upcoming, her name's Elizabeth Amado, and we went to college together. So I've known her since my first year. I was 16, and now we're like way older. Old. And what was I going to say about Liz and the community? So she's an art therapist. And I sent her the draft years ago, and I sent it, and she just commented that she loved that he wasn't shamed, that there was no shaming involved, that it was a teachable moment. And she's loved that since it was just a draft on Microsoft Word, the story. With that said, now thinking about it, I might be Kofi. Like, I grew up kind of like that, not in Ghana, but in Texas. My mom is an incredibly stable person. We've lived in the same home. She's owned the home. She and my dad since, more than 40 years. So Miss Watkins lives across the street. I'm best friends with Miss Watkins' granddaughter, Tiffany. I've known her since, we have pictures together at our first birthday parties. And I know everybody in the community, and I've got that naughty streak in me, even still. And so I would get caught doing things, and some things, by the grace of God, never got back to my mother because I would plead like, please don't tell her, please. And then other times it was kind of like that Kofi moment. My Aunt Rose, which is she's not my aunt. I mean, in the Black community, you have this dynamic, yes, of extended family, and you call your mom's close friends aunt. They're not Miss so-and-so and Mr. so-and-so, or, you know, uncle. They're aunts and uncles now. And I've got tons of those in the small town, Killeen, where I'm from in Texas. So that, coupled probably with many trips to Ghana when I was in my 20s, and seeing that firsthand, like just that it's the same thing. If a woman is very close to the family, she's called Sister Ajua, Sister Abena. Those are real people. That's another thing. Like my stories are not just love notes to kids, but they're also like love notes to the people that I love. So Kofi is based on he's now 11, but at the time he was 3-year-old son, Noah. Lotus is Lotus, but she was pregnant when I wrote the story. So those people, Nasima, Kofi, those people are inspired by real people and real dynamics that I've seen. I feel like I should pay you. Like that was kind of an introspective therapy session right there.
No worries.
I might be Kofi.
I feel like you can feel it, the liveness of him, you know, the way his mischief comes off the page, like totally makes sense that he was based on a real person. I mean, the author, sure, but yeah, he's so alive coming off the page, and he's so embedded. I think that's what struck me, embedded in his place and his community is just really powerful. But with that, I'd love to invite you to read us about Lotus. That would be amazing.
Oh, yes. So the reason why I chose this story, there are 2 reasons. First, the story that deals kind of with what I think we're all going through to an extent right now with COVID, is a sense of grief. And aside from beauty and whimsy and all of these things that I hope that my stories transmit to children, I also hope that they get a sense of the breadth of the human experience, and that it's okay to feel, and it's okay to make mistakes. That was a staple in my upbringing too. Like I made a lot of mistakes, and I always landed on my feet, you know, after a while. And so I think that resilience is important. And then changing the narrative of what could be just a really, let's say, tough or horrible experience, and finding the gold in it and applying that for the future. So the other reason why I chose this story is because, again, it's illustrated by Elena Tomasi Ferroni, the painter. And I was walking, maybe, I guess this is about 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 3.5. I was walking pregnant, very, very pregnant with my daughter Lotus, but I didn't know she was a girl at the time. And so I was just pregnant because every time I'd go for the sonogram, she had her legs closed. So I was walking on the street I used to live on, and this thing fell from the sky onto the ground, and I didn't know what it was. And I just, you know, kind of didn't think much about it. And I looked down, and it was a baby bird. And I'm I read into almost everything. Like if I see a certain bird, it means a certain thing for me. If I see a certain number, when I look at the clock, it means a certain thing to me. And so I was pregnant, and I thought, oh my gosh, what does this mean? And so I was very disturbed, and I just kept going. I get to the corner of the street, and I think, well, Tammy, you didn't even check to see. Maybe the baby bird is still alive, maybe. And so I make a U-turn, go back. By the time I get there, someone has, I believe, unknowingly stepped on the baby bird and smushed it. And I was sick. When I tell you, I could not think of anything else other than that bird. I went to, I'm not a practicing Buddhist, but I really love a lot of tenets of Buddhism. And so I used to go to meetings in my old neighborhood. And so I went there, and I cried about it there. And anybody who had an interaction with me for probably the next 2 weeks I was sick over it. At the Buddhist meeting, though, somebody said, that's actually a very good story. You should write that story. Mm-hmm. And this is the manifestation of that suggestion. So I called it Lotus and the Baby Bird because I was hoping she was a girl, and I knew that if she was a girl, I would name her Lotus. And she is. She's 2.5 now. So Lotus and the Baby Bird. And it was fun because Elena, who also believed she was a girl, just kind of tried to guess what she would look like. And what's freaky is that she looks a lot like. So hold on, let me clean my nails in case, sometimes the internet, they'll be like, ew, she was reading with gross nails. Okay, great. So these are the end pages, which I love. Lotus and the Baby Bird. So when I say I art direct the stories, I always like to leave a lot of creative freedom to the artist. Like I'll have ideas, but Elena really, I would have never have thought to do that. I don't know if you can see very well. So she'll take suggestions, but my lighting, hold on. Okay, there we go. Is that good? Can you see? Mm-hmm. Okay. So this is what my baby girl Lotus really looks like. Hair and all. Elena painted her in utero.
That's amazing.
Crazy. So Lotus had lived on Via del Babuino, that's my old street, in Rome, Italy, her whole life, a total of 8 years. Is the illustration? Mm-hmm. She knew everyone there was to know in the area. Iris the baker, Federico the sandwich shop owner, Paola the woman who ran the jewelry store right underneath her home, and so many others. They had all seen Lotus grow and evolve from an infant into a spunky kid with a few permanent teeth. So these are all people I know in Rome. Iris is actually the basis of Tallulah, the Tooth Fairy CEO.
Wow.
Federico is the illustrator for the first Tallulah, and he formatted this book. And then Paola is the nicest lady who used to own the shoe shop downstairs. All these people. Look at this. Like, what is?
Oh, so beautiful. So
As Lotus grew, so did her hair, and she preferred to wear it just as it sprouted from her scalp. Glorious. Naturally, her hair garnered a significant amount of attention from both strangers and those who knew Lotus best. Mamma mia, che capelli! What hair, strangers would exclaim as she rode her scooter around Piazza del Popolo after school. So for me, it's also a way to kind of memorialize my children's childhood, because they always used to play in this piazza when we lived in this area. Others offered unsolicited wisecracks, poorly delivered as jokes. What, did someone scare you today? A stranger would quip. Did you put your finger in the electrical socket and get shocked? Another would grin and chuckle. These are comments I've had in Rome. Mm-hmm. And the next page is my response. Lotus's mother, however, had long before taught her the perfect response to such unsavory remarks. Tell them the truth every time they ask, she'd instructed Lotus when she began La Scuola Materna, or preschool, around age 3. When they ask you about your hair, tell them it is your crown, she continued. And you, princess, are never required to let anyone touch your crown.
It's just amazing.
She's so good.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And that's precisely what Lotus told anyone who inquired about her coils, each and every time. So for Elena, she made sure of her own volition that there's birds on each page. She told me that later. This is the uniform for my children's school. Lotus began her elementary school education at La Scuola San Giuseppe, St. Joseph's School, in Piazza di Spagna. Now that she was 8 years old and San Giuseppe was near their home, her parents permitted her to walk to and from school on her own each morning and afternoon. One Tuesday morning, Lotus was strolling on the sidewalk on her way to class when something plunged from the sky above, just barely missing her nose, and landed with a thud on the concrete right before her 2 feet. Curious, Lotus bent down to examine what had fallen, and her heart sank when she observed a seemingly lifeless baby bird that, she assumed, had plummeted from its warm nest straight to its death on the ground below. Shaken and saddened, and for reasons she'd later spend countless moments trying to comprehend, Lotus continued walking and left the baby bird motionless in the middle of the sidewalk. By the time she reached Piazza di Spagna, an intense urge to help or at least move the baby bird overcame her. She pivoted and returned to the exact spot where she'd last seen the tiny creature. Only when she arrived, nothing but remnants of the baby bird remained. Someone had stepped on it as they walked to their destination, crushing it beyond recognition. Lotus's heart sank. An attempt to describe the disappointment and guilt that swelled in her heart would be difficult indeed. Lotus was so overcome with melancholy and regret that she could hardly think or speak of anything else at school that day. She had let the baby bird down, she felt, and the questions and wonderings that now consumed her thoughts were seemingly endless. What if the baby bird hadn't died instantly? What if it had suffered? What if it was only too injured to move after such a great fall? Why hadn't she acted sooner? Why hadn't she done something to help immediately? If she would have arrived just 2 seconds earlier, she mused, the baby bird would have landed safely in a warm, welcome nest of sorts, in her crown. That night, as her mother helped her wash her hair in the bathtub, Lotus explained every detail of what had occurred. Her mother listened with great attention, and then smiled and stroked her daughter's forehead. Lotus expressed how she wished she'd at least moved the baby bird right away, or even better, that she'd made it sure it was no longer breathing instead of just assuming, or that she'd gotten there just 2 seconds earlier so the baby bird would have landed safely in her curls instead of the unforgiving concrete. Her mother nodded and smiled gently, then spoke. Lotus, my love, it is fine that you feel pain about what happened to the baby bird, but you mustn't blame yourself. That will only cause you to suffer. Things went as they were meant to go, and the baby bird taught you a lesson, am I right? You still love the bird, even if it is no longer living. Love transcends time and circumstance. Here's the thing, sweetheart. Focusing on what should have, could have, or would have happened won't change a thing. You see, you can't change the past, but once you know better, you can do better. Your job is to use what you've learned. You can change the past. You can't change the past, but the future is all yours to create. Lotus nodded, and she decided that she'd learn and know all she could. And that's exactly what she did. And on the wall there it says Dr. Lotus Burchell. And there's a tiny little baby bird.
Oh, yes.
And the last page says, of course she's an adult now, Mamma mia, che capelli. And she says, it's my crown.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
I'm just,
Thank you.
I'm just processing. It was so powerful, and I love I love the way that, you know, both you and Elena combine that, the reality and the wonder, you know, the hair with the crown and the birds, and that almost that final picture of her walking with all these animals. And I think for me,
That was Elena.
it's so striking because as I said, I work with fairy tales, and often in fairy tales you see the hero or the heroine rescuing an animal and therefore doing that, and therefore being able to succeed in their quest because the animal helps them. And it seems like a really trope in fairy tale, but you know, in reality kids have to confront the idea that they can't always save the animals, and actually that there's so much death out there, and just
Yeah.
that sense of possibility, despite that you're not always in the right place at the right time, feels such and the magic still is there, and we can still try and do better, feels like such an important message today.
Thank you so much. It's interesting because again, that baby bird, I was distraught for probably 2 weeks, and I would go to Elena's studio just big and pregnant and talk about it, and I really thought that like if I had just been 2 seconds earlier, it would have landed in my hair and everything, who knows. And so Elena said, who's more loved than that baby bird? Think about how much you have talked about this bird, and how many people, how many humans aren't considered that much every day. But this bird is still in your heart and your thoughts. And you know, now once she finished, we both agreed now the baby bird lives on.
And now in the book, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's all, yeah, these are the lessons.
Well, thank you so much, Tamara. This has been absolutely rich and
you.
just a joy to talk to you. So we're gonna have to finish now, but yeah, I'd love to do it again in the future. And
Oh, I've got tons. Here's Fatu and the Cora.
yes, and Tallulah the Tooth Fairy, right?
Yes, I'd love to encourage everyone to visit theenglishschoolhouse.com, and I'm on social media, and what else? And Elena too. Elena is an amazing artist. I work with so many amazing artists, and I'm grateful for platforms like yours who are fairy tale enthusiasts and understand the power and the wonder of stories. You'll have to tell me what it is that you've said a few times you work with fairy tales, but what exactly, how?
Well, I think I'm really interested by the fairy tales, the way that fairy tales can help us to have conversations. You know, I come from an academic background, but for me, it's not about taking the fairy tales apart. It's actually using the fairy tales to have conversations about the world.
Yes, because that's what we all have in common, our stories.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Lovely to see you. Bye.
You as well. Bye.